Simultaneously with the mass deportations, asylum applications and processing have been stopped. Human traffic over the border with Mexico, though, has slowed. That's a positive thing. But the idea of sending troops and militarising the land along that frontier is raising alarm in many quarters. Emerald Maxwell with this.
It's Donald Trump's most popular policy among his base, and he knows it.
And I won an election based on the fact that we get them out.
The president promised the largest domestic deportation operation in US history, and he's wasted no time since taking office, putting on hundreds of deportation flights for undocumented men, women and children living in the United States, often to third countries who've agreed to take them in, like Guatemala, Honduras and El Salvador. The latter after Trump struck a deal with President Nayib Bukele, paying his government $6 million to detain more than 200 suspected Venezuelan gang members in El Salvador's massive high-security prison.
And I just asked the president, it's this massive complex that he built, jail complex. I said, can you build some more of them, please?
The government later admitted it had mistakenly deported a Maryland resident of Salvadoran nationality. Despite a US Supreme Court order to facilitate his return, both the Salvadoran and US governments have dug in on keeping him out of the United States.
And if he ever ends up back in the United States, he would immediately be deported again. He will never live in the United States of America again.
To justify these expulsions, the Trump administration is using an obscure wartime law,
The Alien Enemies Act,
which strips deportees of due process. Last invoked in World War II, when people of Japanese, German and Italian descent were interned or deported without trial, its use today during peacetime has been challenged by the courts.
We can't let these people stay, and the courts are allowing them to stay, and we're just not going to allow it.
A struggle that looks set to continue, with the FBI arresting a Wisconsin judge on Saturday for allegedly helping a migrant try to evade immigration authorities.
People think we are not near fascism, but we are. We're going to be no better than Germany was in the 30s and 40s.
Immigration authorities have also deported 3 children with US citizenship, one of whom is receiving treatment for a rare cancer, in their rush to deport their undocumented mothers. But while the highly publicized arrests and deportations have stoked fear, the number of people deported is in fact down compared to the same period last year under Joe Biden. And as of yet, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office lacks the budget to increase mass deportations. What has plummeted are border crossings, after Trump deployed troops to the southern border and indefinitely suspended asylum for any migrants trying to enter there. In March, the number of migrants caught illegally crossing the border from Mexico fell to around 7,000, the lowest level ever recorded, from a monthly average of 155,000 under Biden.
Distressing images in that story by Emerald Maxwell. Of course, real people at the heart of all that we're seeing. Let's bring in for analysis about Trump and immigration, Mark C. Storella. Now, just to give you the context, Mark is a former US ambassador to Zambia. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ambassador. Mark is also former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Population, Migration and Immigration. That was from 2016 to 2018. So if I'm right, Mark, that means you straddled both Obama and Trump in his first mandate. But today you are Professor of the Practice of Diplomacy at Boston University. So I've got a number of titles I can give you. I'll go with Professor if that's okay. So Professor Storella, thanks for being with us, sir. It's a pleasure to have you. The forum's open to you here because I'd like to know what you think about Trump and immigration, because from where I'm standing, there seems to be no method to the madness. What's your take on the situation?
Well, there may be no method to the details, but actually I think that there is a theme overall. When Donald Trump announced his candidacy back in 2015, he came down that escalator and the first thing he said was, Mexicans are bringing crime and drugs and rapists into the United States. And he hit on nativist tones, casting people who are foreigners as the other, objectifying them. And he built fear, which what's called his base, they believe in it. Now, in fact, we know that immigrants into the United States are less involved in the criminal justice system than native-born Americans. In fact, they're less likely to be criminals. But that is no matter. The point is, it has revved up his base, and he's running on it. And I want to say about this, he's not the only one. we see this nativist tendency across the world. We're seeing it in the rise of Le Pen and the National Rally in France, the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany. We see Hindu nationalists in India, and we see Buddhist nationalists in Myanmar. So actually, I think what we're seeing is an American version of a global phenomenon, and it's being used by politicians to advance their own causes.
You have hit the nail on the head with that analysis about other countries doing that. And it is something we're seeing here in France completely. This sense of how society is moving towards a more far-right position. I know in the country I come from, the UK, that's happening too in that sense. Coming back to Trump and his 100 days, the deportation of prisoners, certainly to El Salvador, has raised many questions about the actual ethics of doing that kind of thing. And then add to that the fact that one man is involved in that who the Supreme Court, by a margin of 9-0, says he should be brought back. And of course, he hasn't been. This isn't a good look for the United States.
I would say it's worse than not a good look. It's very bad democratic practice. What we're seeing that really distinguishes Trump's actions is two things. One is that there has been a blizzard, an absolute blizzard of executive orders covering all aspects of immigration and refugees. One halted the refugee resettlement program, which I used to work on. One tried to revoke birthright citizenship, which is guaranteed in the Constitution. Another targeted sanctuary cities that want to provide protection for immigrants. Another authorized the use of this Enemy Aliens Act from 1798. They really had to dig into the books to find this one. It's never been used before except in wartime, and it permits powers to carry out fairly arbitrary deportations. They've also detained foreign students just for what seemed to be speech. There's no criminal allegation. So that's number one. This is a tremendous blizzard. But number two, these executive orders in many cases are stepping on the US Constitution because in many cases the authority of the Congress is involved in these actions, and he's not turning to the Congress, he's just acting. The result of this has been a raft, an absolute raft of lawsuits. I think it could be in the hundreds of lawsuits at this point against the Trump administration for its various executive orders, many of them about immigration and refugees. And so we're heading into a situation where our democratic system is being tested. And it's yet to be seen how this will work out. It takes time to go through the legal system in the United States.
That legislation you were talking about, Mark, 1798, the Alien Enemies Act, passed down to John Adams, who was then president. I mean, we're going back to...
From Massachusetts, from Boston himself.
It's phenomenal to sort of put all this into that context. There's another act, which I'm sure you could tell us more about, the Posse Comitatus Act. This concerns, under that, the idea of militarizing the area behind the border wall in some way, which again raises so many questions about how you treat people and how you treat and deal with people.
Well, this is a real concern. The idea behind that, and also an executive order passed yesterday called Unleashing Law Enforcement, is really about becoming much more aggressive and empowering law enforcement and also possibly private citizens to enforce laws. That's a very dangerous thing in a situation in a democratic society that's supposed to be based on the rule of law. There are tremendous opportunities for that to get out of control. President Trump has said that he would like to use the U.S. military, not just to protect the border, but actually to enforce action against protesters, for instance. That would be a totally aggressive use of the military in the United States. And I think, as you know, Mark Milley, the former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when he was asked to walk with President Trump to visit a place where there was a protest going on, he felt that it was improper for the U.S. military to be put in that position, and he regretted that he had done it. So you can see another potential rift developing inside the United States about how we should enforce our laws and whether or not the military or private citizens should be engaged in enforcing laws.
What I'm hearing, Mark, is that there are some very honourable people who see that what they're being asked to do and perhaps the positions they're being put in are wrong. And they see that there are different ways to act. And you're outlining this for us just by the very things you're telling us. And I'm wondering whether the Trump administration's approach to those who are of other places and are seeking help, it goes very much against what Americans see in themselves. The idea of the American dream, for instance, where you can come to the States and you can create your own future and reinvent yourself and get rich. You can sort of have great things, or you can have justice, you can have freedom. The Trump administration perhaps now setting up the idea of the USA as being different from that.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm glad you raised that question. It really is a part of the identity of the United States. We think of ourselves as a nation of immigrants. And in fact, we are a nation of immigrants. The United States right now, today, has 50 million immigrants living inside its borders, more than not only any other country, but more than the next 4 countries combined. We identify with the Statue of Liberty of welcoming people who face persecution, who are fleeing difficult situations. And we recognize that people who come to the United States, sometimes as students, sometimes as refugees, sometimes as other forms of immigrants, contribute enormously to the culture of the United States, the economic development of the United States. And I'm sure you've heard the term brain drain. We try not to engage in brain drain from around the world, but the fact of the matter is that many immigrants have been some of our most successful Americans. That is very well understood. I really appreciated in your presentation just now that you cited the poll numbers. It's only 100 days, and already President Trump is underwater on immigration issues. Only 27% of Americans who were asked support his revocation of student visas. He revoked 1,800 student visas. Only 33% support this idea of using this 1798 Act to deport people to places like El Salvador. And 29% don't want anything to do, or only 29% approve any action related to that prison in El Salvador. So the American people honestly are saying, I think pretty clearly, they want due process and they think things have gone too far, too fast. I'm sure you've all heard the expression that's associated with the so-called tech bros from Silicon Valley, move fast and break things. Well, he's moved extremely fast, but I think he's also breaking things.
Mark Storella, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I remind people that you are the former US ambassador to Zambia, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Population, Migration and Immigration from 2016 to 2018, which meant appointed by Obama and served under the beginning of Donald Trump in his first mandate. And of course, today, Professor of Practice of Diplomacy at Boston University. Thank you, sir, for joining us and sharing your analysis of Trump's first 100 days from the angle of immigration with us here in France 24. We do appreciate your time. Thank you. Mark Storella.